Hello, and welcome to the Esri GeoDev webinar series. This series is a continuation of the series we created in the hopes of engaging in developer-related topics and discussions in between dev summits. We hope you get as much or even more out of it than you anticipated. Now, we would like to introduce you to today's webinar, Extending Web AppBuilder for ArcGIS. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see a panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce you to David Martinez, Product Manager of Developer Technologies, and Gavin Raykemper, Software Engineer in Professional Services, also with Esri. David, let's get started, shall we?
Okay, Amy. Yeah, let's get started. So let's talk about Web AppBuilder. So let me give you a little preview about what we're going to talk about today. So first, we're going to be a brief introduction about what is Web AppBuilder. The next part we're going to talk about is creating a widget. So Gavin's going to dive into creating a widget, give you some good guidance and a good example on that. Then I'm going to talk about creating a theme. And then finally, we're gonna open up to some Q&A to get some questions and hopefully provide you guys with some answers. So let's get this started. So Web AppBuilder is a tool to build apps, and in fact, it's very popular. And how popular is it? So today, roughly, I checked the dashboard today, and we have roughly 306,530 apps created with Web AppBuilder. So it's pretty popular. It's very well received. It's great for rapid app development. It's always good for customization as well. As you may or may not know, Web AppBuilder has basically two editions. One is for ArcGIS Line, and the other is part of Portal, which is part of ArcGIS Enterprise. And the one that we're going to be talking about today is the Developer Edition. And just to give you some of the functionality that's available with Web AppBuilder, so it's HTML5 based, no plugins. You could do configurable apps. You want mobile apps as well. Allows you the ability to do less programming. But today we're going to talk about programming, pure HTML, JavaScript, and you also want, it's basically a responsive UI. So if I create an app, I expect that same behavior from web to mobile. It supports 2D and 3D. It's got a GUI builder that you can do out of the box widgets. You can also create custom widgets and themes, which we're going to talk about today. There's support for 3D web scenes. We support OAuth 2, and it's embedded in online and Portal, and there's a lot of functionality in there. But rather than me just talking about that, let's get into some more details about the building blocks of Web AppBuilder. So let's hand that over to Gavin.
Great, thanks, David. As David mentioned, Web AppBuilder apps are built around a web map, and the widgets are the tools that we are making available to app users to use on that web map. Widgets are focused functionality. That is, a good widget should do one thing very well and should be able to be used on its own without any other dependencies. Creating a custom widget uses the same skills that you already have through building JavaScript apps with the ArcGIS JavaScript API. So on the right here is an example of a sample app you might have right now. You have some CSS at the top, some JavaScript, and some HTML markup. Well, those three concepts are all directly present in our concept of Web AppBuilder widgets, but they're all in separate CSS, JS, and HTML files. Web AppBuilder expects those files to be in certain places. This saves you from wasting time having to set up complex configuration files. All widgets must have a manifest.json file, which tells Web AppBuilder about your widget. It also must have a widget.js file, which is the main entry point to where Web AppBuilder will use to call your widget. Everything else here is optional. Widget.html is your HTML template. Config.json is the settings of your widget. And then there are folders for NLS, your language translations, CSS for your styles, images, and so on. Setting is a special folder. It's where you define out the logic of the template and the template for the setting modal that pops up when the app author adds your widget to an app. With Web AppBuilder widgets, we'll be creating JavaScript modules that inherit from base widget, which is provided in the GIMU library of Web AppBuilder. This provides you with the power of Web AppBuilder, enabling a bunch of developer features, like accessing the map object through this.map, accessing the config through this.config, and calling additional lifecycle methods. The additional lifecycle methods are in addition to the default lifecycle methods that come with a Dojo widget. If you're not familiar, these are basically functions that get called automatically when certain events happen in the app. You can still use the defaults that Dojo provides, like post create or startup, but within Web AppBuilder, you can also use the additional ones like on open when the widget opens, on sign in, etc. So because we're inheriting from base widget and you're able to utilize these built-in events, it allows you, the developer, to focus on writing only the code that pertains to your business logic, your custom UI, and your styles, thus saving you time and giving you the ability to create apps with custom widgets really quickly. The custom widget framework also supports an easy way for you to design a configuration modal that will show when the app author is creating an app, as well as an easy way to provide language translations of your widget so that the widget shows the correct language based on the user's browser settings. Web AppBuilder apps are built on the ArcGIS API for JavaScript, so you can utilize all the features from the API in your widgets as well. Note that as of today, you build a 2D app using the version 3 of the JavaScript API, and if you build a 3D app, you'll be using version 4. This might change in the future so that all apps will use version 4, so stay tuned for updates on that switchover in the future. I'd now like to show you how to create a custom widget for Web AppBuilder. You start by downloading the developer edition from Web AppBuilder over at developers.arcgis.com, right here. You'll see this big download SDK button. Click that, log in, and it'll download a zip file onto your computer. When you unzip that zip file, it'll look a little bit like this, with a couple folders. This client and server folder is important. We'll come back to that, but there's also a startup.bat, which is how you start up the server. So I'll double click that, and you'll see here in this console window that it's starting up the Web AppBuilder Developer Edition server. It opened a new tab in my browser for me, and it kind of showed me the initial screen. So this initial screen is just kind of setting up Web AppBuilder to get it started. You need to put in your ArcGIS Online organizational URL, which I've already done, and then you also need an app ID. An app ID is basically the key to allow Web AppBuilder to access your ArcGIS Online organizational account. If you don't know how to create one of those, you can click the FAQs button here and get started, and it'll there's instructions here on how to go into ArcGIS Online to create an app ID. I've already got one of those ready here, so I'm going to paste it in and continue. And after logging in, we see the main view of Web AppBuilder Developer Edition. Here it lists all the apps that we've created on our local computer, but since I've just freshly installed this instance, it's actually empty. So let's create an app. So when I click create, I can see that I can create an app from a template. There's a variety of templates that come out of the box. You can even create your own. Today I'm just going to create a default 2D app. Give it a name and hit OK. You can upload a thumbnail as well to be associated with your app. But after you click OK, it'll actually create your app. And here we get launched into the builder interface of ArcGIS of Web AppBuilder. If you've been to the ArcGIS Online version of Web AppBuilder, this probably looks pretty familiar. On the left-hand side is the builder tools, and on the right-hand side is the desktop preview of what your app actually looks like. One of the nice features of Web AppBuilder is that you can click previews down here to see on different devices, on tablets or mobile phones, what your app will look like as well. So creating my app, the first thing you do is choose themes. There are a variety of out-of-the-box themes that you can choose from. And this is where David's going to show us how to create a custom theme later on. You can choose your style for your theme and then even sub-layouts of your themes. The map is very important. Like I said at the beginning, you're building an app around a web map from either your ArcGIS Online or portal. So you can choose your web map here, which is a very important step. You can see when I chose my web map, it automatically pulled in, it will pull in all of the attributes of that web map, including the base map, the layers, even the symbology and renders for those layers. You can see here I have a layer of national parks over the United States. And the third tab here is the Widgets tab. This is where most people spend most of their time. It's where we can add the tools into our app to allow our users to actually interact with the app. This theme came with 2 widgets kind of built in, the legend widget as well as the layer list widget, but we can remove those if we want, and you can even add your own. So if I click here, I can see all of the out-of-the-box Web AppBuilder widgets. Maybe I want to add maybe a base map gallery. So I'll click there. I see the settings page where I can change some settings about this widget. And we can see immediately on the right-hand side in the preview, here's the base map gallery that I just added, which is nice. So now that we've got an app built, how do we build a custom widget into this app? Well, today I'm going to demo creating a widget called Find Restaurants that utilizes the Yelp.com API to find restaurants near a location. So to get started quickly, let's start with a sample widget. I'll go back to the unzipped folder that I started with earlier. And instead of, before I ran startup.bat, this time I'm going to jump into the client folder, STEM app, and the widgets folder. This is basically the kind of the widget repository of Web AppBuilder, of where all of the widgets are stored. You can see that all the out-of-the-box widgets are already here. So for example, base map gallery, this folder houses all the files that make the base map gallery widget that we just added run. But instead of using an out-of-the-box widget, I'm just going to jump down to a special folder called sample widgets. And in here we have, with Web AppBuilder comes a variety of sample widgets that we can look at to see how things work and even start with one of these. So today I'm going to start with the simple widget. To use this widget, it's best to rename it before you add it to Web AppBuilder. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to make a copy of this folder, and I'm going to rename it in 2 places. The first one is I want to name the folder. So I'm going to call my widget Find Restaurants. And then within the widget, in the manifest.json file, which I talked about earlier, this tells Web AppBuilder about your widget. I want that to be the exact same, the name of our widget. In here, you can see that it's a JSON object that has a lot of different properties about my widget. So maybe I can fill in my author name and a description. And then here are the properties. These are very important. This is what Web AppBuilder reads to figure out what functionalities it should use with your widget. We'll come to that. We'll come back to that later. But for now, I've renamed my widget. So I'm going to take that folder and move it from the sample widgets folder up a level into my widgets folder. And now that it's in the widgets folder, that's all I need to enable my widget. If I go back to my browser and I go to Web AppBuilder, when I go to the widgets panel, we now see that widget right here. It has no settings right now, but if I actually preview it, we can see that this is the simple widget that I just started with. It's got some text in it. It's got a button that says an alert, and that's really all it does. So now there are a couple ways to develop a widget with Web AppBuilder. The simplest way is to load the widget using the config query parameter. And that's what we'll do today. So first, I'm going to save out the app that I've been building, and I'm going to make a copy of the configuration of this app that I was building. To do that, I'm going to go back up to the base directory of the unzipped Web AppBuilder Developer Edition files. And instead of going into the client folder, I'm going to go into the server folder, apps, and I'm going to go into the app ID that I'm working on, app ID 2. And I'm going to copy this config.json file over to where I just was in the client stem app folder. I'm going to enter the sample configs folder, and I'm going to create a config file here. I'm going to call it config-restaurants. And so I'm going to copy the config from the app I've created over into this config-restaurants.json file. And what this allows me to do is to use the config syntax. So you can see here that I basically took the Web AppBuilder URL that I've been working with, but I added onto it /stemapp, config equals, and then the path to the config that I just created. Doing this will load that config that I just created, and it'll load the widget from the stem app folder. So it'll actually load the widget from my widgets folder, which is what I want for development. So let's see here. If I go into my widgets folder, and let me open that up in my text editor, find restaurants. Let's make sure that when we make a change, it's actually being reflected in our browser for development. So let me change our template string in our widget to say, instead of saying this is a very simple widget, I'm going to just say demo. I'll save that out, refresh the page behind, and let's make sure that changed. Looks good. Okay, so we're good to do some development. Now, what do we actually want to do with our widget? Well, first of all, the first thing I want to do is utilize the NLS translations functionality of Web AppBuilder. That's something that I want to put in place even before I do any real feature development. So let's go ahead and do that. I've already got an NLS folder set up. So I'm going to copy over this folder. But the first thing I'm really going to do is go into our manifest.json file and tell Web AppBuilder that I now have this NLS folder, and it should look for that. And that's the hasLocale property here. So if I set this to true, I know Web AppBuilder's now, when loading my widget, it's going to look in this NLS folder for some translations. In the strings.js file, you see our translations. We've got some key value pairs that are basically tokens that we can use inside our widget that Web AppBuilder will automatically substitute these values in. So I want to use welcome line into my widget.js file. So now I'm going to switch out that demo to say nls.welcomeLine. So now I know whenever Web AppBuilder loads up this widget, it's going to replace the proper translation into this location. We can see back in our strings.js file, we're enabling Spanish. That's what this ES:1 is. So in that ES folder, you can see that here's where we've got our Spanish translations. So now if I save all this out, when I refresh the page, we should first see that Web AppBuilder will replace that token with hello, because that was my English translation. And now over in I have my Firefox enabled to have its locale set to Spanish. So if I load up that same URL in my Firefox here, and I open my widget, we'll see that Web AppBuilder automatically translated our widget for us with the translations file that we provided. So great, we have NLS translations all set up. My widget can be used in different languages, which is great. Now let's start building the functionality of our widget. Basically, in our widget, I want to build a input box where someone can type in an address and search and find the restaurants closest to that location. To do that, I'm going to start with a few files, so let me copy those over first. And like before, I'm going to first start with my manifest.json file. The first thing that you can see all the files that I added on the left-hand side. I I added in a config.json file. The config.json file is basically the settings for this widget. So in our case, we're going to use this for our API key for our Yelp API key. So we want Web AppBuilder to automatically pull in this config.json file for us. So I'm going to set this to true. I've also copied in a CSS folder with a style.css. And this is basically going to be the styles that it's going to make our widget look good. And so I'm going to tell Web AppBuilder to load that. Finally, I've copied in a widget.html file. This HTML file is basically going to be our HTML template that Web AppBuilder is going to load in instead of using this template string, which was what we were using before. So I want Web AppBuilder to load in my widget.html for me. So I'm going to set that one to true as well. So now that we've got that all set, the last thing we need to do to add some functionality is actually to update our widget.js. So like I said before, the first thing I'm going to do is add in some dependencies. So let me go ahead and do that. And I'm going to remove this template string because, like I said, we told Web AppBuilder that it should load widget.html on our behalf. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a base class. What this is going to do in the widget is it's going to automatically wrap my widget in a CSS class, find restaurants. And that's how my CSS is going to key off of, or it's the class that my CSS is going to use to apply our styles. So that's going to be in place. The next thing I'm going to use is a widget lifecycle method. I talked about these earlier. This one that I'm going to use is postCreate. PostCreate automatically gets called when my widget is created. And so it's kind of where you want to do one-time things. I'm creating an instance of Yelp. So this Yelp function, or this Yelp module is loaded here. You can see yelp.js is what is being loaded in. I'm not going to go, you don't have to worry too much about this file, but basically yelp.js is just a interaction with the Yelp API so that I can call, give it an X and Y, a lat and long, and it'll give me back the restaurants for a particular location. So we're creating an instance of that, and we're passing this .config.api key. That's our Yelp API key that Web AppBuilder is automatically loading in for us. And then I'm going to call create search widget, which is a function that I'm going to define here. Within the create search widget function, I'm going to create our search box. So instead of having to put in an HTML input box and a button and wire up the geocoder, I can actually use functionality from the ArcGIS JavaScript API. And that's what I'm doing here. This new search is actually referencing this Esri/digit/search up here. And so I'm using the search digit from the JavaScript API inside my widget, and thus it's saving me time and I don't have to do a lot of custom coding. So I'm using this .map, which Web AppBuilder is providing. It's a reference to the map, and I'm going to place this into my template search widget wrapper over here. In my HTML template, here's the search widget wrapper. So it's going to place my search box right into that HTML template for me. I'm also setting up an event, so when we do have when someone searches in the box and they click enter and they find a location, we want to show those, we want to call our function show results for point. We want to take that location and send it to the Yelp API. And so that's the function that we're going to define right here. Show results for point basically takes a geometry, a point in our case, and calls the Yelp API, calls get locations, and we'll make a call to the Yelp API and we'll get back our results. Then we call display results. This is a function that I've defined. You don't have to worry too much about it. Basically, this is a function that we're taking the Yelp results and we're displaying them in our widget. So I'm going to save that out. And after all these things are saved, I can refresh the page. And in my widget, we now see that there's a search box here, and that's the JavaScript API search box that I was talking about. I can type in here, it automatically does a geocode against the Esri World geocoder. It does the geocode, gets back a location, and then we sent that location to the Yelp API and we're showing results, which is really great. It's showing the closest results to that location. So that's great. We've got our widget and we can type in an address, but we're not actually interacting with the map. So in my National Parks app here, I want someone to be able to click on one of these national parks and find the restaurants near that location. Well, that's not currently possible. But luckily, Web AppBuilder does have a functionality that lets us do that. Those are called feature actions. The feature actions are what shows up in our pop-up when we click these little 3 drop-downs. It allows you to do things like pan to and things like that that you would do with a specific feature. And my custom widget can add a feature action to that drop-down. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to add one file, our feature action code, and in our like before, I'm going to start with our manifest.json file. In our manifest.json file, I'm going to tell Web AppBuilder that I want to use a custom feature action for our widget. So here I've got a feature actions property, and I'm sending it an array of objects. Each one represents a feature action that I want to enable. We're just enabling one. We're going to call it restaurants near, and then we give it the name of the file for our feature action. We're calling it restaurants near action. So here's the restaurants near action code that I have. This is all the code that there is. It's kind of similar to the widget.js file, but instead of extending from base widget, we're extending from base feature action. Base feature action assumes that we have 2 functions defined out, is feature supported and on execute. Is feature supported just is a function that Web AppBuilder calls to see if it should show our feature action for a particular feature, and on execute is what gets called when someone clicks our feature action. In our code here, we're using Widget Manager, which is a Web AppBuilder functionality to open our widget. Then we are actually using the show results for point function, which if you'll remember earlier from our widget.js file, that's what we were using before. And so in this way, we're just sending the results from the feature action into that function that we already had defined in our widget. And so we're reusing our code, and we don't have to add too much code to support this feature action. So I'll save all this out, refresh the page. And now, in addition to the widget being able to search in this box, I can actually click on one of my points, click the little drop down, and now we've got a feature action, find restaurants near here. I'm going to click that, and you'll see that it runs the same function that we were before. It shows the restaurants near that location. So that's great. We've got a widget called Find Restaurants. You can either search an address or you can click a point to find restaurants near that address. So this would be a great widget for us to share out to others. The one last thing that we want to do before sending it to others would be to enable a settings page. So right now, to use this widget, you have to set this API key in this file called config.json. But we can make a settings page so that it's more user friendly. So let's go ahead and do that. I've got a settings folder already created to save us some time. So I'm going to copy that settings folder over to here, and then I'll talk about it in a second. But similar to the previous 2 times, I'm going to start by adding this functionality in my manifest.json file. This time, I'm going to tell Web AppBuilder that my widget does have a settings page now. So I'll set that to true, that this has settings page property to true. And so now Web AppBuilder, when it loads my widget, will automatically look into this setting folder. I copied this setting folder from files that I had created earlier. But basically in here, the setting.js file is where Web AppBuilder will automatically go. We're extending from base widget setting, which assumes we have two functions, the set config and get config. This set config function is the function that gets called when when Web AppBuilder is populating our settings form. So I'm going to do config.API key, since my name in my config.json is API key. And get config is what gets called when the person clicks save and we're translating the setting form into JSON. So here I want to call that API key. So we're outputting a JSON object. In our setting.html, this is similar to our widget.html. This is our widget HTML template, and you can even use NLS and CSS here. And I'll go ahead and name this Yelp API key. So now that we've got that in place, if I remove this, save it, and refresh our page, we should now have a settings page when we add our widget to our app. So let me go to the widgets panel, open up the widgets, add my find restaurants, and now we can see where before we didn't have a settings page, it's now asking us for our Yelp key. So now our widget is more user-friendly for app authors. So that's great. I can now use my widget and send it off elsewhere. I've got this app, and we've got a custom widget in it, but now we want to make it look good, apply our own branding for our company maybe. So that's what David is going to show next.
Great, thank you, Gavin. So let's talk about themes. Okay, so basically a theme is you, right? It's your brand, it's your style, and you have complete control of how that app represents your organization. Okay, so Web AppBuilder has themes, but you can take that to the next level to really customize those to what you want your application to look like. And what are the components of a theme? Well, the first one is we have a layout, right? So the layout is a list of preset UI components, such as positioning widgets, panels, and other UI elements that sit on the map, such as like the zoom slider, search box, home button, and the size of the UI elements. Okay. The next part of that theme is a panel. So think of a panel as it's a container, and basically of your widget's content that sits in a DOM node. It could be different in terms of features. In fact, if you're familiar with Web AppBuilder, some of those can be collapsed, some of them can be dragged, some of them can be expanded. And in fact, if you're familiar with the foldable theme, there's actually two panels, and there's a dockable and a foldable panel in there. And the next part of the theme is the style, right? So the style defines the look and feel of the app, but it's just not limited to the color of the header. You could do sidebars, you could do panels and other UI elements to really change that. Think of fonts, anything of that. And then also too, we have this thing which is a widget, right? So don't confuse that with the widget which Gavin was showing you. Think of more, to be precise, would be a theme widget. Think of things such as a controller, which is basically driving the brains of your app. And then how the app is communicating. Maybe you have widgets, part of a theme, that are communicating with other widgets that need to be opened and closed. So basically think of it how it controls the behavior of that. So with that, let's talk about creating a theme and then get into actually creating a theme from scratch. So what are some of the tools that you need? So you're going to need some HTML5. You're going to need some CSS, and you're going to need to know some JavaScript, and of course you're going to need a little bit to know some Dojo. Now you're going to see a common pattern here of what Gavin was showing in regards to the widget structure. It's the same guidelines in regards to framework, which is part of themes. So at the minimum, you need an icon of the theme that would be displayed in the web editor's UI. You're going to need some, the NLS, which Gavin was talking about. So think of that as which can contain the strings used by the theme. And then you're going to need at least one style, right? Because it has to have a default that it needs to go to. And then you're going to need to have a default layout. Okay. So let's get into that real quick. Okay. So at the very minimum, the easiest thing that you could do for getting started is you can go to the demo theme, copy everything here, what you need, paste it in the theme. And basically what we did is we took demo and we started with this thing called sidebar theme 1. And let's go into our IDE here real quick. And basically we have another manifest JSON. You're going to see a common pattern here if this is new to you. So that name basically just has to match that folder structure. And it's going to ask you, okay, what does it contain? Well, it has the panels. It has a style. It has the styles, and it's got a default layout. Pretty simple stuff. And so what does that theme look like out of the box? So let's go to our Web AppBuilder, and here's sidebar theme 1, and this is what our theme looks like. Nothing too advanced. You basically have some widgets on screen and the map itself. So let's go through the exercise of changing this theme, okay? So let's go back into our IDE. The first place that we're going to start is our config JSON, okay? So as you can see, here's our config JSON, which we have widgets on screens. We got stuff within the widgets themselves, everything that makes up that, and the map position. So let's change this. So let's go ahead and get rid of these widgets. Let's go to line 32 here, and let's clean this up. So we're going to get rid of some widgets here. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to build a theme that has a controller, 2 a panel, and then we're going to give it some styling to change the UI of the widgets. You give it some border radius, change the size positions and such. So since we're going to build a controller and add to this, we're going to do some repositioning to make sure everything fits in within the map. So let's just get rid of this left and go to 0. We're not going to have a top placement here position. We'll put that at 0. Height's going to be 1, and width's going to be 100. Height we're not going to worry about, so we're going to make this relative to the browser. Okay. And then basically what we want to do is now we want to add a search widget to the map because it doesn't have one, okay? So let's add a search widget to this map here. I'm just copying some existing JSON I have. So basically we have URI, which is the location of the widget. We're going to open that right when the map loads, and we're setting this to the upper right-hand corner at the top. Okay, nothing too complicated here. But since we're adding a panel to it as well, in addition to the controller, we want the ability to reposition these, okay? So since we're going to add a panel, we need to accommodate the panel within the widget pool, okay? So what we're going to do is, let's add one here for the panel, okay? So basically we have a panel, the URI, it's relative to the browser, there's the index, okay? And now that we're aligning things to adjust for that, we also need to adjust the map position. So we're just going to say, hey, map, take 510 the rest of the map, okay? And this looks good. We don't have any problems here with any syntax. So let's just save this. Let's go back into our theme. Hopefully this works, the thing with live demos. Go ahead and refresh. Select your theme, and here we go. As you can see now, we have this white gray background, which is we're building. You see the maps moved over. So let's build to this, okay? So the next thing that we want to do is we want to start building the controller widget, okay? So what we basically did is we copied the controller widget from the samples, and what we need to be able to display is we got to read the app's configurations, and we want to put something in there to display the app logo, okay? So the first place that we're going to start is our manifest JSON, right? So here is it's a custom widget for the sidebar controller, which we're calling this, and we're not going to need a panel with this. So let's just say we're not going to have a panel, so we're going to say this is going to be false. Okay, is this a controller? Absolutely, it's going to be a controller. We need to let that know. And is this a theme widget? Yes, this is a theme widget because it's part of this theme, okay? So let's just hit save. The next thing that we need to do is, since we're adding this controller to it, we need to define some UI, right? So as part of that is we got to add some logic here to add some widget UI. And let's just give it a simple tag just to see that, make sure it's working. We'll say, hey, hi, GeoDev. Here's a div class for a logo, and then any other container nodes right in there. Because what we're going to have is we're going to have widgets within that container. Okay. And the last part is we need to account for that within the UI. Okay. So we go back to our config JSON file. Okay. And then we give it the URI, which is basically the location of the widgets itself for that controller widget, and how it's fixed within that position. Okay, so let's hit save. Let's go back to our theme, and let's go to theme 2 since we're going to sequence. So now you can say, hey, it says hi GeoDevs. There's where my controller is going to go. To the right at that's going to be my panel, and still we have our positions. Okay. So some of the things that we're going to change going forward is we're going to change the look and feel of this and this, and then obviously we're going to change the font. Okay, so let's go back to our IDE. Now what we need to do is, since we added some UI for our controller, we need some logistics behind it to account for that UI. What do we want to do, right? So basically what we want to do is we want to be able to update the UI. So if we add a widget, we want that to reflect the app's configuration, okay? So what we're going to do is we have some code snippets here, and let's just get these, and we're going to do get logo, okay? So we have a code snippet. So we're going to use this thing called this app config to get, to get the app logos, and then basically attach that to the logo node, okay? And the next part is what we're gonna need to do is we need to basically get all the configs of all the widgets defined in the widget pool, okay? So what we're gonna use is this thing called this get all config, all right? And then basically what we're gonna do is, once we get that, we're gonna basically loop through those and basically add those icons to the UI. So here's that code to do that. And we're just checking to see if anything's set at open start. And if not, only open the first widget. Okay, great. So now that we got that, all right. Now we have to move over to the panel, okay? So since we're adding a panel, we want to be able to show the name of the widgets that's opened in the header section. So we're going to display that in the DOM node of that, okay? So let's get this. We have some code snippets if you're wondering, like, I'm getting this pretty quick. So basically we're going to get this GMU panel title, which is going to have that, attach it to that title label node, and what's the content for that title, and basically put it to the container node, okay? So you're probably seeing it in a common pattern here. We're adding the logistics for the UI. Now what's the functionality to execute that in code? So now we're going to go over to the panel.js because we have to account for that. Since we added an HTML template, we need to add the Dojo dependencies for that, okay? So we add this digit templates mixed in and this panel.html. Now what we have to do is, since we added that, we have to account for we need the ability to use this .config to I don't know, this fun's in there for, that's not fun, but we basically need this to get the panels config here to be able to read the label and put that in that UI that we accounted for, okay? So everything looks good here. We hit save. Let's go back to our theme here. Let's go to our theme 3 now, okay? So as we go to our theme 3 now, you can see, okay, now we have a list of the widgets within the controller. We have now a panel with the widget. We have the title of the layer here, of the widget. And next, what we want to do is change this UI here, change this UI here, and change this to really make this theme pop, okay? So before we do that, let's get in and really understand what is the structure of Web App Builder and what makes up the UI of these components. So to look at this at a high level, we got Web UI, and then we have GIMU widgets, then we got Dojo widgets, and we got ArcGIS API widgets, okay? So how does this work from a UI perspective? So let's go from bottom to top. So we inherit Dojo digits, okay, that we bring into the JavaScript API, right? We have our own Esri.css. We bring the API directly into Web App Builder, which we have our own common CSS, which is basically the GIMU CSS and GIMU override CSS. We have a bunch of defaults that override existing Dojo and JavaScript widgets. And at the very top, this is where I believe the true magic is when you're doing the themes, is because you basically can overwrite all that CSS with the theme. And you've probably seen that when you're going between different themes. There could be different fonts, different color schemes, etc., different brands of that. And starting at 4x, I know Gavin was talking about, we're going to slowly remove the dependency on Dojo digits. So at the theme level, you have a common CSS, right? And then you have the style CSS. The common CSS is great because it overrides the entire CSS of the theme, right? So what does that mean? So on all styles within the same theme, I would recommend using the common CSS as opposed to doing each individual style.css. With the common CSS, you can apply basic rules such as typography, icons, right? Change the height, width, normalization, spacing, and of course, override of Dojo digits in the API widgets, okay? So let's go back to our IDE and let's look at one of our, okay, it's not open. Let's open up our common CSS for our last part of our theme to show you what we're doing here. Okay, so at the very top level, we are importing a different font here, okay? We're importing a font from Google's API, Open plus Sans, right? And then we have some stuff we're overriding here, but where the true stuff is happening is with when you see this dot sidebar dot theme. So basically here we got this GIMU widget zoom slider. We're overriding that. If I scroll down to line 56, here I'm changing the height of that zoom slider to a 40 to 40 pixels. If I keep going down, let's see, to let's say 60, let's see, we could say the disabled, if we want it disabled on vertical. And if we go to, let's see, 95, search input here, this is the search part. We give it a border radius here, so giving it some rounded edges and stuff. And here we're overriding a bunch of the different widgets in here to really give it that custom look and feel of what we want this theme to look like, okay? So if we go back to our theme, let's go to our finished product, right? So this is not finished yet. You can see nothing's happened here. We go to our breweries one. Now you can see the theme has a bigger area for the font size. The look and feel of the theme is completely different. We got some border radius here. We adjusted the height and width of the zoom control. So we click on our locations and we execute our widget. And now this is part of our theme, and we can take this theme, push it up to our ArcGIS Online portal, or push it up to ArcGIS Online, and we have a new theme to represent our web map. So what Gavin and I have shown you today is two examples of how to extend our framework, which is basically widgets and themes.
Right. So, like David said, we've shown you a basic way to build your widgets and themes. This is a good method if you're kind of just starting off. But if you're working in the enterprise or on a team, you'll likely need a little bit more infrastructure. So for advanced development workflows, we recommend a few things. One, keep only your widget or theme source code in your source code management. Try to resist the temptation from checking in the full Web App Builder folder structure. Two is, because of that, you will need to use a task runner like npm scripts, gulp, or grunt to build and copy your files to the correct location in your running Web App Builder. We also recommend using a CSS preprocessor to scope your CSS. To do this, we have a script. We have a widget generator script that kind of does a lot of this stuff. It's a command line interface that can easily generate widgets and the tooling for advanced workflows around them. It'll ask you a few questions about your widget, and it creates all the necessary files for you. It even creates a grunt script that'll copy your code and transpile your code if you want to write in the ES 2015 style. So I highly recommend using this if you're creating multiple widgets or you're an advanced developer kind of wanting to see the best workflows. And the URL for this script is out on GitHub right here. So finally, we hope you're excited about using custom themes and widgets for Web App Builder. To get you started, we'd like to offer you a voucher today for 500 free credits applied to your ArcGIS for Developers account. If you don't yet have an account, you want to go to developers.arcgis.com and go ahead and click sign up for free right here. That'll bring you to a page. After you've signed in, you'll be able to log in and go to the top right-hand corner of developers.arcgis.com, click redeem voucher right here, and go ahead and type in that voucher code. That's GeoDev11718. And you must redeem this code before the end of the day. The credits won't expire, but you do have to put in that voucher code by this evening. So please, right after this webinar, go ahead and sign up and put that in. It's GeoDev11718. So finally, we'd like to kind of keep this conversation going online. We'll post any questions and answers that we don't get to today on the Geo Developers group on the Esri GeoNet community. So please go to community.esri.com and search for GeoDev and click follow to join our community. So now we'll be able to take a few questions. I think Amy's going to facilitate that for us.
Thank you, Gavin. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Our first question for today is, will we be able to download the code for the restaurants widget?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know both me and David, we went quickly through our examples today. I hope you weren't trying to, follow along. It was more of kind of an outline, and yeah, we'll definitely post the URL to the widgets out on our GeoDev group, like I just said, and you'll be able to download that code and kind of look at it after the fact.
Yeah, and the same thing with the themes. We'll post the theme from one of our colleagues developed with that theme. We have it. We'll post where it's at.
Great. And are there any plans to make the custom widgets enabled in ArcGIS Online?
No, not as today. The thing with ArcGIS Online is we don't allow you to insert code into ArcGIS Online. The way you can host it though is you develop in Web App Builder, you push it up as a template, but you're responsible for hosting that on your own web server. That's got to get to that and read that JSON that makes that up.
Great, thank you. And how do you deploy the custom widget to the Web App Builder embedded in on-prem portal for ArcGIS?
That's a good question. We just enabled being able to do that in ArcGIS Enterprise 10.5.1. So if you haven't seen this blog post that I just pulled up here, go ahead and check this out. It kind of goes through all the steps that you need to do to create a custom widget and deploy it out into a portal or ArcGIS Enterprise, as long as you're in version 10.5.1 or higher.
Thanks, Gavin. Is there an online tutorial for this Web App Builder for ArcGIS that someone could read and then study to reinforce this presentation?
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, David. I would recommend, and we can include this in our links, just starting with the documentation. So that's at developers.arcgis.com/webappbuilder. And so we have a lot of really good documentation out there, including a guide. So if you click the guide tab here and you go into widget development, there's a lot of good, getting started, and it goes through a lot of the steps that we kind of went over today. So that's where I would start.
Yeah, hey Gavin, can you repeat the code again for the voucher?
Oh, yeah. That's, I'll put it up right here, GeoDev 11718.
Maybe just leave it up and then we can answer the questions in there. We'll leave it up.
Great.
Amy, so Amy, there was another question about the individual icon images, I believe.
Okay.
So someone asked, do we have access to individual icon images? And we didn't show where the images are, but absolutely. If you go to any of the widgets or theme directory, you have access to all those icons. There should be an image folder in there.
Okay. Do you need an app ID for Portal?
If you're using Developer Edition with Portal, yeah, you can follow those instructions that I referred to create an app ID. You would use that for Portal as well.
Did using AppBuilder on Portal for ArcGIS consume any online credit?
Yeah, so it depends. If you have an org that uses ArcGIS Online, let's say you want to leverage the online geocoding services or the geo-enrichment or the analysis service, it would consume credits at that point.
Okay. Is it possible to use 4.6 API JavaScript version in Web AppBuilder Dev?
So with the recent version of 2.7 that was just released, we now have a new documentation page on developers.arcgis.com. It's called About Release Versions. And it talks through, for each Web App Builder version, what JavaScript API version and a lot of other information is here. So you can see with the most recent version, 2.7 of Web App Builder, to use version 4.6 of the JavaScript API, you can use a 3D app with the JavaScript API 4.6. But I know that's a lot of numbers, so you can just refer to this page out on the documentation page if you want to come back to that and look it up.
Perfect. Within the widgets, there are functions such as analysis widget has the buffer and overlay functions. Is there a way I can use both the buffer and overlay at the same time?
David, do you have a thought on that? I guess.
Yeah, no, I don't. I would need to look at it because I imagine it's asynchronous between the two. I guess we could probably chain them. Yeah, maybe we can get into more detail on that, maybe on the GeoNet forum or something in our group.
Yeah.
Because probably the out-of-box functionality, the way it works, it's probably asynchronous, and there's probably a way that for your typical functionality that you're describing in that question, maybe we can chain it or something. Probably some custom stuff.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for one last question. What are the plans to update the documentation for the various classes and digits used in Web App Builder DE? The person is saying that they have to tear apart existing widgets to see what classes and digits are available that aren't listed in the documentation, and then examine the JS files of that class to see how to use it.
Yeah, you are correct. In fact, that's I mean that's how when we first released Web AppBuilder, that's how I learned as well. And that's something that we have the main classes as part of GIMU, but we don't have all the digits, right, as the other widgets that we use. That's certainly something that we can bring up with the doc team. I don't know if you have any more insight on that, Gavin, besides.
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff out there, and yeah, I'd say it's constantly being updated. And if there's something in particular that you want documented, definitely click feedback on this topic on our documentation pages right here, and submit some feedback that's monitored, and you can kind of submit your feedback there.
Okay, great. Thank you, David and Gavin, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Extending Web App Builder for ArcGIS. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact me using my email address in your follow-up email. And once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide us with your feedback. We will be definitely providing a recording of this presentation, which will be available within 7 to 10 business days. So on behalf of Esri and our presenters, thank you guys so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.